You're running for Attorney General of the state of Florida. What are you doing?
Yeah.
What is that about? I mean, you're 32 years old. What the hell?
Yeah, exactly. So, I think our people are kind of fed up with what's been going on in this state for the last 20 years. Obviously, what we've been trying to do isn't working. I think people want someone young with, new energy and new ideas. We need some new blood, and that's what we offer.
Next November, Floridians will go to the polls to not only elect a new senator and governor, but they'll also have the chance to elect an entirely new cabinet. Now in Florida, that's incredibly important as it's a more decentralized authority in terms of central government. That means that positions like Attorney General matter a great deal. The Democrats haven't held the Attorney General spot in Florida for 15 years, and they hope that a 32-year-old will be the answer to their prayers and their electoral drought. His name is Ryan Torrens, and he's an attorney from Tampa. We had an opportunity to speak with him at length last week as he had a campaign swing through South Florida.
This time. Now, I've got a lot of priorities in this campaign, but I just want to tell you a few of them real quick. One of the reasons I'm running is I think it's important that we have an attorney general who actually have the courage to take on Betsy DeVos in the education department for ripping off our students.
If elected, Torrens would succeed Pam Bondi, the Attorney General who famously spoke at the Republican convention last year.
I think her tenure has been very poor. Her office doesn't even have a consumer protection division. A lot of other states, even Republican-dominated states, many of them have a designated consumer protection division within the Attorney General's office. She doesn't even have that. She goes around and spends taxpayer dollars bragging about all the great things she's done tackling sex trafficking. She's closed probably 6 or 7 actual cases. She's not holding big companies responsible for ripping off Floridians. She's companies like Wells Fargo, Equifax. Her tenure has been very poor. Now, to her credit, on the opioid situation, she did come in and shut down the pill mills. But there was very little thought about what was going to happen after she did that. And of course, a lot of these Floridians, when they're cut off from the pills, have ended up going underground and getting on heroin. So I think overall, she has not been willing to put the Attorney General's office back on the side of consumers.
Now, Torrens is a rare politician because he's been very upfront about his past struggles with alcohol. Now, it's not clear how voters will respond to that bluntness, but what is true is that he's put a lot of thought into the issue of substance abuse.
More Floridians have now died from this opioid crisis, from opioid addiction, than actually died in the Vietnam War. Over 5,000 last year alone died from the opioid crisis. And when I talk about this, I don't just talk about opioids because, a new report just came out that says that African Americans are dying from addiction to crack cocaine at the same rate that white folks are dying from the opioid crisis. So it's really a crisis of addiction that we need to take very seriously. It's really crippling our families. The Florida taxpayers are having to put resources into this to tackle this crisis, and it needs to be addressed in a comprehensive way, all the way from holding Big Pharma accountable to the AG's office actually going after these fraudulent sober homes that are existing, especially in areas like Palm Beach, and going after them, making sure that the drug dealers that are peddling this stuff are being locked up like they should be. It really needs to be a comprehensive approach, everything from that to an expansion of our drug and mental health court systems.
Now, when it comes to marijuana, Torrens says that he wants to take a wait-and-see approach.
So I think as to the medicinal marijuana issue, the people of Florida have spoken on that. They voted, and they voted in favor of medicinal marijuana. And it's my position that when the voters vote for something like that in a ballot measure, that the legislature should make sure that your vote counts. And in circumstances like the marijuana issue, where the legislature is trying to stall, perhaps because they disagree with it on policy grounds, I believe that the Attorney General can actually sue the legislature to enforce that and to make your vote count. And if I'm going to be the Attorney General of Florida, if the legislature does that, I will sue them to make sure that their voice counts. So that's my position on the medicinal marijuana issue. On recreational marijuana, I get asked that question a lot, and in all honesty, what I've said is, I want to take, a deep dive into that and take a good look at it. I want to even go to Colorado and see the Colorado experience. I've heard good things, and then I've heard some people be critical. So I'm open-minded to that, but I really need to see the hard evidence go check out states like Colorado that are already doing it and see what their experience is, talk to their elected officials and so forth, talk to some people over there before I would, issue an opinion on whether I would be open to Florida, adopting recreational marijuana.
On the issue of criminal justice reform, Torrens says that he feels for Black Lives Matter supporters and that he wants to see change.
Well, I would start off by saying that, I understand the concerns, of groups like Black Lives Matter. I mean, obviously, every Florida life, matters. I don't need to say that, but I understand the concerns. I have represented juvenile minorities, for example, in our criminal justice system. I have seen the criminal justice system up close and personal, and so I understand, those concerns. And I think what we need to do is we need to have an attorney general who, while on one hand keeping our families safe, is going to look at each case carefully and make sure that every conviction is done within the confines of our constitutional limitations, because I do stand very strongly by the view that only a conviction that is done within the confines of our Constitution is a just conviction. And I think that many folks in the African American community right now, they feel like law enforcement is against them, they feel like the courts are against them, the judges are against them, and perhaps they feel like their own attorney general is against them. And so I think they need to feel like they're going to have an attorney general who's really going to fight for justice, whether you're black, white, Hispanic, it doesn't matter. And that's going to be a major priority of ours, tackling these issues of criminal justice reform that the African American community feels so passionate about.
When pressed, Torrens did go into more detail about exactly how he wants to change the criminal justice system.
Where the Attorney General can have a direct impact, and I don't want to get too much into the legalese, but the Attorney General represents the state of Florida in criminal appeals. And right now, it's basically the knee-jerk reaction of our Attorney General that every single conviction needs to be affirmed, even if there is a minority defendant who had his or her rights violated. And I think if we have a case where there's very clear constitutional violations, the Attorney General needs to convey that to the appellate court instead of just say every single one needs to be affirmed, even if people's rights have been violated. So I think there the Attorney General can have a direct impact. And also, a lot of these criminal justice reform issues obviously, need to go through the legislature. I wouldn't have a vote in the legislature, but I would have a voice, and a really big voice, and be a member of the cabinet. And so I am a big supporter of legislation to reform, for example, our juvenile justice system, to have the greater use of citations so we don't ruin these juveniles' lives, many of these juveniles being, minorities. And I would vocally support a lot of that. I've also thought of the idea of some type of a criminal justice reform commission to be led by the Attorney General's office to try to, push forward reforms in this area. So you're right that a lot of that falls outside of the jurisdiction of the Attorney General's office, but I could certainly have a loud voice in favor of, really pushing for justice in this state, regardless of the color of your skin.
If elected, Torrens would serve on the state clemency board, which means that he would literally have a life and death decision to make from time to time. So what is his view on the death penalty?
So, I've said over and over again in this campaign that on the death penalty, as a matter of policy, what our office would do is we would review these cases on a case-by-case basis. I am not going to take the approach that the state attorney in Orlando did and issue a blanket policy of never pursuing the death penalty. It is an available remedy on the books under Florida law, and we would evaluate each case on its own facts. And so that would be the policy of our office. Of course, the Attorney General's office doesn't get that many cases where the death penalty is at stake. They're big drug trafficking cases and things like that, typically not murder prosecution. So it doesn't come up as often as in the state attorney's office.
But in terms of your being on the cabinet, though, your position would be you'd look at it as a case-by-case basis. So you're not saying that I'm against the death penalty, and I would vote against the death penalty in every case. That's a legitimate position that a lot of people hold.
Yeah.
You're saying no. Actually, I'm in favor of the death penalty in certain cases.
Well, what I'm saying is that I have personal reservations about it, but it is, as a matter of state policy, it's an available remedy on the books, and I don't feel that I'm in a position to issue a blanket policy of never pursuing it in any case. We would handle those in the clemency board on a case-by-case basis, as well as cases that come into the Attorney General's office for prosecution.
Now, Torrens' main theme in his campaign is a little bit more thematic than specific. He views the office of Attorney General now as being turned into a right-wing political machine, his words. And now he wants to see it go back to a time before politics was involved in the office.
You know, and I think that Mrs. Bondi, first of all, let me just say that I'm real big in this campaign on having our own message. We're running our own campaign with our own ideas and our own proposals. But to address the issue with Mrs. Bondi, I think that she has inserted the Attorney General's office in some very political issues that the Attorney General has typically not been very involved in. And in many ways, she has successfully turned the Attorney General's office into a right-wing political machine. I think overall, the Attorney General's office should not be that political. The job of the Attorney General is to protect our consumers from crime and from being ripped off, and to protect all of our people. It's not supposed to be that political, and she has politicized it.
So will Ryan Torrens become the next Attorney General of the state of Florida? Well, obviously we don't know. It's too early to say. There's no good polling on the race. But one thing is true. He's the only Democrat in the race so far. Now that may change and complicate his chances. But the bigger challenge is the fact he hasn't raised a lot of money. But with all that being said, Torrens is still optimistic about his chances.
It's interesting because I see our agenda as really just common sense, and I think many Floridians will see our agenda as common sense, whether it's going after sex traffickers or holding big pharmaceutical companies accountable, or making sure that our students aren't getting ripped off by lenders, holding payday lenders accountable, and making sure they're not ripping off our people. I see that as common sense. Some people say, oh, that's a very progressive agenda. I see it as just protecting Florida's consumers. I don't see that as a Democratic or Republican agenda. It's just the right thing to do for our Attorney General.